Our session today is about the return of geopolitics and the end of illusions aligning the transatlantic world. And we have a very distinguished panel that will illuminate us through this question. We know that the transatlantic community is today at a real historic inflection point between a fading area of relative stability that we had for a long time and a volatile and very dangerous age of disruption. We face strategic competition with a revisionist Russia, but also military and technological advanced China, each of which are seeking to disrupt the rules-based international order. Terrorists threaten our life. The periphery of Europe has turned into fire, into a ring of fire. Disruptive challenges extend to emerging technologies that are changing the nature of competition and conflict, but also emerging technologies that are upending the foundations of democracy, defense, and diplomacy. Then we can talk about climate change and energy transitions. So without further ado, I'd like to start this panel that will be very interactive and we'll try to get most from our time with Ambassador Robert O'Brien, the United States 27th National Security Advisor from 2019 to 2021. Ambassador, you sat at the White House, which is the most important center of gravity in the world. In your opinion, what are the most salient challenges that should require the immediate attention of the transatlantic community, but also that should alarm us all from all over the world?
So Val, that's a great question, and I used to be asked when I was National Security Advisor, what keeps you up at night? And I used to say, I want to try and keep our adversaries up at night and have them worried about us. But look, there are three big challenges that we face, and that hasn't changed in the last several years. Number one is we've got Iran, which is a day-to-day challenge, the largest state sponsor of terrorism, and unfortunately our friends in Israel are facing the results of Iranian terrorism and essentially an Iranian invasion of Israel. Number two, we've got Russia, which is an imperial power and wants to rebuild the Russian empire. And then the existential threat to America and the West is China. And I don't think the whole West has understood the threat that the Communist Party of China, the last truly Marxist-Leninist party that has a universal ideology and wants to destroy our liberty and freedom and our way of life for our kids and our grandkids. And so China is a big threat. And the good news is, and I'll start with the good news because I'm usually accused of being that's what my wife would call a Debbie Downer, talking about all the challenges we face. If you're a foreigner, your American friends will explain who Debbie Downer is, a Saturday Night Live character. But the good news is over the past few weeks, I've been in Halifax in Nova Scotia at the forum. I've been at the Reagan Defense Forum last weekend and here at IDU. And at the end of the day, I think that the good guys and good gals win, that democracy and the rule of law and liberty and individual freedom prevail over the tyrants. But we got a heck of a challenge ahead of us. But forums like this are going to strengthen the alliance and give us hope for the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Goncharenko, we know that, as Ambassador O'Brien also was saying, that Moscow's nearly a decade-long now aggression of Ukraine is the most immediate danger for the transatlantic community. Now, I think we're bombarded with the news what's happening between the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So it looks like we are distracted. It looks like people are forgetting what's happening in Ukraine and the big, huge toll on human lives, women, children. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for a great possibility to be here. And there was planned that President Poroshenko will take part in the panel. Unfortunately, he was not allowed to leave the country. So he sends his greetings to everybody. And answering your question, you're absolutely right. The one person who benefited from what the hell is going on in the Middle East right now is Mr. Putin. It's so clear. It's not Israel, it's not Palestinians, it's nobody in the world. It's just one man, Mr. Putin. And I don't believe in coincidences, So, yes, the world is distracted, and that is bad news because Putin is not stopped. I want to be frank with you. The situation in Ukraine is extremely difficult. The situation on the front lines is extremely difficult. Russia is becoming stronger. That's something I need to tell you. Putin is more dangerous now than he was 2 years ago, before invasion to Ukraine. Because Russian army, yes, they lost a lot of people, but they don't care. Yes, they lost a lot of tanks and things like this, but instead of this, they became battle-hardened. And just imagine this monster. Just recently, they increased their army for more than 100,000 people again. So now they have 2 million people army. They have a real battle experience of the war of 21st century. Just 2 armies in the world have this big experience. It's just Ukrainian and Russian army. Their economy is on war footage. They are not restricted anymore by any sanctions. They decided that they survived it. That's one question why the sanctions don't work how they should. But still, they decided that they survived it. And this is a monster. And just God save us from this. But if they would be successful in Ukraine, and we will do everything we can, and I'm sure in our success that it would not happen, but if it would happen, if they will occupy Ukraine, 1 million more Ukrainian men, and you will have 3 million army, battle-hardened, without any restrictions, and with eager to fight. And Putin is not going to take country back to peaceful life. You need to know this. He wants to live in the war. So after the finish of hostilities in Ukraine, in this or other way, if Putin will not be defeated, he will attack again. And this monster is on the doors. The barbarians are at the gates of the free world, of Europe. This is a bad news, and we need to speak about it loudly and clear and frankly, that today Putin should be defeated in Ukraine. He is still not. And for this, the courage steps should be made. Ukraine should be in focus, with all respect to all other situations in the world. And only by this, we can have a secure future. Without this, it would be a disaster.
Alexei, we hear discussions in policy circles that we might end up with a frozen conflict. And I want to hear from you very briefly, what are the consequences for the European security and transatlantic security if we have a frozen conflict in Ukraine?
Definitely that will be embolden Putin, because he will feel that he has some success. As I told you, he will never stop. Then the whole world will say, the West is weak. Mm-hmm. The West is weak. You told we will be with Ukraine as long as it takes. But is it really 2 years? Is it really 2 years span which made West so tired? That will be the question. And other countries will ask, can we rely on the West? Can we rely on the free world? These will be the consequences. Other countries will say, China will be emboldened. They will watch and say, wow, why not us? Mm-hmm. Why shouldn't we do something? And I just want to remind you that, speaking about Ukraine, it's very important that we can be, and for us, security guarantees are everything. We want to become member of NATO. We want the next summit here in Washington to be a real success. Today is a very sad anniversary for Ukraine. It's the anniversary of Budapest Memorandum. It's today. 29 years ago, Ukraine gave up its third in the world nuclear weapon arsenal for some security guarantees, which appeared to be nothing, absolutely nothing. So now we need a real security guarantees. But it's not that Ukraine is a beggar here that we are asking. Ukraine also has what to invest. Today, the main asset of Ukraine is Ukrainian armed forces. So if Russia today is really, probably now they are already the second army in the world after the United States, and before China, because what we know about Chinese army, we don't know. We haven't seen it in action, fortunately. And we don't know how strong it is. But what is the third army in the world? It's Ukrainian army. Because we are battle-hardened, we know what to do. And ask yourself, if the West will need people in trenches near Tehran or anywhere else in the world, who will be in these trenches? Yep. Ukrainians are ready, but in exchange for security guarantees and being a real part of the Western world. We want to be, and we deserve it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alexei. Ambassador O'Brien, the United States has supplied since February 2022 around $110 billion in military and economic aid to Ukraine. Europe in around those numbers, $97, $98 billion. And so we know that, this support has made it possible for the Russian forces to be unable to take political control in Ukraine, although the aid, as Alexei was saying, has not been sufficient for what is the clear objective of the transatlantic community, a clear victory of Ukraine. What should allies do more to support Ukraine?
Well, thanks, Val. That's a great question. It's something I've thought a lot about. One of the things I'm proud of is that when I was in office, up until the time I was in office, and some of our senior directors, Julian Eschwatz here and others, but we never got lethal aid to Ukraine. And we got the Javelin missiles to Ukraine. And those Javelins were critical in blunting that three-pronged armored attack on Kiev and on Ukraine at the outset of the invasion. Now, I compliment the administration for the supporting Ukraine since, but I get the feeling, and again, I'm watching from the peanut gallery, I'm in the cheap seats now, but it's always too little too late. Poland can't give the MiGs to Ukraine because that might provoke Putin. We can't give HIMARS to Ukraine because that might provoke Putin. This whole thing about not escalating and not provoking Putin and not allowing the Ukrainians to win is a little ridiculous. And by the way, it's a European problem as well as an American problem. Putin's already been provoked. He's invaded a neighbor. I mean, he's trying to make the idea that a country could take territory and get, in legal terms, good legal title to territory through conquest has not been an item in international law since the end of World War I. Now, Hitler tried to revive it in '38, but the idea that you can invade a smaller neighbor and just take it and get good title to the country, it shouldn't be open for debate anymore. And so we have to stop Putin because in addition to Putin watching what's happening in Israel and I know we talk about Hamas, it's Iran invaded Israel, okay, through Hamas. Hamas wouldn't fire a BB gun over the border of Gaza without Iranian approval. But we've now got, of our three big adversaries, we've got Russia's invaded Ukraine, Iran has invaded Israel, and we're waiting for the other shoe to drop with China and Taiwan. And the reason is that they believe that we're weak because we're so concerned about escalation that we're showing that our weakness is provocative. Now, the West is strong and will remain strong, but we've got to come together, and we've got to come together in Ukraine right now. So America should be the arsenal of democracy. We should give lethal aid. It's hard for America, given our budget deficit and everything going on here, our open borders, to do more than lethal aid for Ukraine, but we can give Ukraine a lot of lethal aid. It's up to the Europeans to step up. And I understand the concerns about admitting Ukraine to NATO with an active war going on in Article 5. But why has the EU not admitted Ukraine into the EU? I mean, put aside all the processes and problems. Why has the EU not dismantled? I mean, Nord Stream 2 has been disabled, but why aren't ships out there dismantling the pipeline, letting the Russians know that that's never going to come back again? That the good old days of Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin, hanging out, the trade and investment, those days are over. We've got to have the Europeans step up and give aid and infrastructure and take care of Ukrainian civil society. America can't care more about European security than the Europeans care about European security. We'll do our part. We'll be the arsenal of democracy. We'll take our valuable stocks and resources and diminish our reserves of our weapon systems and get them to Ukraine. But the Europeans have to step up in a big way, and we're not seeing it. Because I think there's still a feeling among many in Europe that we can go back to the good old days. And the good old days, and I love our German friends and they're a great ally, but the days of getting cheap Russian commodities and turning them into expensive finished goods and selling them to the Chinese at high margins and having America defend you are over. That was what I call a German first or a European first foreign policy. The days of beating up on American tech companies, and look, I'm no big fan of some of our tech companies, but the days of beating up on American tech companies because it's Europe and the digital tax and the antitrust litigation, the Digital Marketing Act and that sort of thing, and just taking pot shots at America, and yet knowing that Uncle Sam will be there and the American people will continue running up a $33 trillion deficit to defend Europe, those days are over. We need burden sharing. And some of the countries, the Poles have stepped up. The Baltics have stepped up. Some of our allies have really stepped up. But the days of the free ride of Europe are over. And it's not because we don't love Europe. It's not because we don't share the same values as Europe. But we need a real partner. We can't just have, Europe can no longer be a junior partner. The EU's got as big an economy as the US. The American taxpayer can't underwrite Ukraine fully. So it's time for the Europeans to step up in partnership with the United States of America, and we need to do our share as well. And we need to stand by our Ukrainian allies, because if we lose Ukraine, we're going to lose Taiwan. The Middle East is going to be in chaos, and the tyrants are going to be on the march. And so we've got to draw a line here, but we've got to do it together. And for my European friends and my Canadian friends here, we love you, but you got to step up and get behind the program, and not expect American taxpayers to carry the whole burden.
Ambassador, it looks like in Europe there was a wake-up call, the full invasion of Ukraine, because Ukraine was invaded back in 2014. We don't talk much about that. But the full scale is like the old model of getting security from the United States, cheap energy from Russia, and also cheap products and big markets in China. Yeah. It's changing. So the Europeans are getting together, and we're seeing more coordination, I would say, also in terms of policy coordination with the United States. But you mentioned a very good point about democracy, and I'd like to come back to that. And we had the speech this morning. It looks like in our discussion of strategic competitions, it's becoming clear that competition extends beyond the traditional measures of power, and it's centering more on democracy versus autocracy. And I believe 2024 is going to be one of the most important years, because it's the year that most of the half of the people of the world are heading to the polls. There's going to be 74 elections in 2024, and it's going to be 4.2 billion people going to vote. What are we in the West taking democracy for granted, and what should we do to consolidate it in our countries, but also push it more in the wider world?
So we've got to make hard decisions. And Alex and I talked about this. I remember being in Ukraine in 2014 and going to Maidan and seeing the photos of the people that were killed by the Russian snipers and the security forces in Maidan Square, and the inspiration that gave me. But we've got to understand that the threat to democracy, the biggest threat is the Chinese Communist Party. And people don't want to address it, and our European allies don't want to address it. We've got a major problem with China. I mean, the president just spoke from Ghana, but I can tell you China's all over Africa, China's all over Latin America, and the influence is pernicious and it's malign. And for our European allies and friends, you have to understand America is going to have to put more and more of our armed forces, our hard power, and our diplomatic tools into Asia, into Pacific and Asia. And that means the Europeans have to step up and deal with, the Russians, but also support us with China. And there's a reticence in Europe. I mean, we still have trade delegations, and look, we've got some from America too. So it's, we've got Wall Street and the Hollywood, the movie industry, that are enamored by China still. But there's a developing bipartisan consensus in America about the existential threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to us. And we've got to stand up to it. And the Europeans have to get on board with that. And our European friends and allies, our Canadian friends and allies, need to understand that the 74 million people, or 74 elections, that number is going to shrink if the Chinese have their way. And again, it goes back to Ukraine. I mean, when you talk to President Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan, they're watching it very closely. They want us to win in Ukraine because they know that they're next. They know that Xi Jinping is considering and calculating everything that's happening. He's watching the weak sanctions against Russia. And Vladimir Putin's wealth, according to the Chinese, there's a Chinese think tank that just did a study, Vladimir Putin's personal wealth has increased as a result of the Ukraine war. That shows how effective our sanctions have been. The Russian ruble is doing better than it has in years because of the increased price of oil. So even with the weak sanctions, the Russians are doing very well with this war, and they're using it to rebuild their military machine. They're going to a war economy. And you're right, Alex, they're not going to stop at Ukraine. So unless we put on full, Larry Kudlow, our former National Economic Council director, and I called a week before the invasion, I think it was early February, we called for full sanctions on the Russian Federation Central Bank. Cut off the Russian Federation Central Bank. Kick them out of SWIFT. This idea that we put sanctions on the Russians, but we exclude oil and gas from secondary sanctions, we exclude commodities, and we exclude agriculture. Like, what does Russia do other than agriculture, commodities, and oil and gas? And when's the last time anyone here got on Amazon and said, hey, I got to buy that latest thing from Russia? Okay? There is no economy other than those, but we've exempted their entire economy from the sanctions. So there are no sanctions. So what lesson are the Chinese learning when they see an economy the size of Russia, the small economy surviving? They look at their economy and think Western sanctions won't do anything. So, to protect democracy, we've got to use all tools of national power. We've got to use sanctions. We've got to rebuild our militaries. Our NATO allies, God bless them, have to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Some NATO countries are. The ones that are threatened on the front lines are, but most aren't. If we want to protect democracy, we've got to get serious and using diplomatic tools, economic tools, military tools, and we've got to rally around Israel, we've got to rally around Ukraine, and we've got to rally around Taiwan, the countries in the direct line of attack from the authoritarian powers.
Absolutely, they are protecting our democracy too. So Alexei, very quick response from you. Ukraine actually is one of the countries that has been living under these hybrid tools and misinformation, disinformation. And actually this is also where the war is happening in the information space. What is your take?
Yeah, Russia started this war far away and many years ago, and it's always started, the modern wars are starting with the wars for the brains. That's the reality, and we need to be strong enough to stop both Russian tanks and Russian propaganda. And tell me what is more dangerous. I couldn't answer you.
Okay. Final point, 1 minute each. How should the transatlantic community also collaborate better on other issues such as climate change, public health, humanitarian crisis?
I'll just be quick on that. And you notice how the problem with poor Val is she's moderating and she's got a lawyer on the panel, so she gives me the microphone and I'll just keep talking. So I'll stick to the minute. Look, all those things are important. Humanitarian relief and disaster response are critical for the West. We do it better than any country in the world. China doesn't do it, Russia doesn't do it. When there's a crisis in the world, it's America and Europe that come to the rescue, whether it's a tsunami or an earthquake. We're the ones who are there in the front. Israel, those are the countries that are on the front lines. And so we've got to continue to do that because that shows our humanity. It shows that we care about our friends and neighbors, even if they're far away. But we've got to use all the tools of power to win this contest between freedom and authoritarianism. And as long as we stick together, and I'm an Atlanticist, I believe in the alliance. I get a little frustrated sometimes with our European partners, but I'm sure they get frustrated with us. But we've got to stick together. We're the only group we've got an alliance that's real. The Russians don't have any allies. They've got Syria and Cuba and Nicaragua. The Chinese rent North Korea and Pakistan. We've got Australia and Japan and Europe and Canada and Mexico. We've got great alliances in the West. If we leverage those shared values and our brotherhood and our belief in freedom and the rule of law and liberty, we'll win and they'll lose, the way Ronald Reagan talked about the end of the Cold War. But we've got to stick together.
Absolutely. Alexei?
I will just give you one example. I have two sons. My smaller kid is 5 years old. And a year ago, when he was 4, I was with him on a playground in Odessa. And there were explosions in the city. And I'm responsible for my kid. I was nervous. And he said to me, "Daddy, don't worry, this is ours." He knows the difference. He knew at his 4 years age the difference between air defense working and Russian missiles coming. And I just want to tell you, I don't want any kid in the world know this. And this is the responsibility of our generation, to protect your kids from knowing this. And we can do this, because free world is strong enough. The only thing we are lacking is a leadership and, being strong enough to make a courageous decision and boldness. So with boldness and leadership, we are strong enough to protect democracy, we are strong enough to protect our kids, and to build a better future. I believe in this. Without this, it is no sense to be here and to do anything. So I am a believer.
And on this note, I would like to thank, on this strong note, I would like to thank the distinguished panelists. Thank you for being with us. And I want to apologize to the organizers that we took a little bit longer, but this was a fascinating conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, Val.